Welcome back, everyone. This week we'll be talking about how you can be right or you can make money. Me personally, I prefer both. Thank you very much. Today's piece is going to revolve around the paragraph below. It's taken out of the book, The New Merchants of Grain. To go hand in hand with the below paragraph and what was the initial inspiration for this article, we'll be discussing the phrase, you can be right or you can make money. The paragraph that we'll be referencing today says this. Some of the best advice I ever received went something like this. Be less concerned about defending your logic and being right because you don't have all the facts. Be more concerned about the outcome and managing your capital. When it's framed this way, you realize a bad bet isn't an indictment on your intelligence. Being wrong on occasion is just a part of the business. Get over it, let it go, and move on. Being wrong only becomes a problem if it's either the chronic state or if it results in a spectacularly bad outcome because you stubbornly held on too long in the belief you were right. End quote. Keep in mind, for the remainder of this article, that the essence of these quotes does resonate with me. Its sentiment is not lost upon me, but sentiment doesn't excuse sloppy speech. As a person who chronically insists that you must question the concepts in a statement as much as the statement itself, I'm sure the above paragraph has prompted you to ask some questions, such as, what do they mean by defending, logic, right, and belief? Why would I be more concerned with outcomes and managing my capital instead of being right in a logically defensible way? Doesn't the defensible logic that you use to determine your rightness affect how you deploy your capital as well as the outcome? A bad bet is an indictment on my intelligence or is not necessarily an indictment on my intelligence. There's quite a distinction and critical failing point there. Oh, I understand. I'm quite familiar with the all too common practice of people using words in replacement of other words to imply an underlying sentiment. Essentially, they say things without saying things in an indirect, implicit, and subtextual fashion. They use words in a connotation-heavy and denotation-light fashion. When they're not busy doing that, they're underemphasizing one point for the sole reason of creating contrast in order to emphasize another point. Not because one idea is less crucial or deserves to be underemphasized relative to the other, but because that's seemingly the only way they know how to talk. I outlined this phenomenon extensively in an article I've written where I shared my observation about a podcast guest who thought it was remotely appropriate to say such things as inflation is not an economic phenomenon, it's all about psychology, and small things don't matter, big things matter. As a side note, you will see in the description, well, never mind, that's not going to happen. Back to the article. Speaking with the connotation in mind while ignoring how the denotation doesn't make sense is a dangerous recipe. Doing so is not without its costs. In specific regards to today's topic, it often causes, number one, the underlying meaning, semantics, sentiment, and connotation of a word to be inconsistent, in direct conflict, or in contradiction with the denotation of that word. Number two, it's often the case that a person has no business underemphasizing one point for the sole purpose of overemphasizing another point, especially when they're both crucial and complementary points. In doing so, it often creates unnecessary opposition and constrains the dialogue past an optimal point. Oftentimes, the more nuanced dynamics get formulated into a short and punctuated absolutist statement. That then leads to compromising what was the initial goal all along due to radically simplified and exaggerated obedience. In specific regards to today's one-liner quote and example paragraph, it looks like this. You can be right or you can make money. Be right. Be right is a verb phrase that's actually being used to mean stubborn and thus wrong. Calling someone right when implying that they're stubborn and thus wrong is the connotation contradicting the denotation. They can't be both wrong and right. Except they can be, because depending on how you want to use those words, whether that be on their connotation or denotation, they in some weird altered world can be. They also use the word be instead of the more appropriate were, which causes a timeline contradiction. Be is a present tense verb. To say you can presently be right or you can make money contradicts the reality of when they were right. They were right, but now are wrong. Being less concerned with defending your logic and more concerned about the outcome in managing your capital. This is them emphasizing one point to underemphasize another point. This is them emphasizing one point to underemphasizing another point. In doing so, they contradict the prevailing investing wisdom that sound investing practices and developing a good thesis is the first step in your investing journey. This makes it not practical in application. The reason this happens is because it contradicts the order of importance by getting it backwards. Decisions lead to outcomes. So why would you emphasize the outcome more than the very thing which determines it? That's putting the cart before the horse. Isn't the logical defensibility, defending your logic, and therefore the rightness, being right, of your idea the determining factor and prerequisite for how you manage your capital and thus the outcome? This means that the author's words are in direct conflict with essential investing basics and thus reality. The example paragraph is but the precursor to the inevitability of the title of today's piece. You can be right or you can make money, because it's often the case that more nuanced contextualized expressions get reduced to the point of being a radical and absolutist statement. Taking it literally. It's when you paraphrase the selected quotes of today's article and literally interpret them that it becomes undoubtedly obvious that it's a heavily semantic and connotation-laden paragraph, or they're complete morons, which I don't think is the case. Take, for example, the quote of the day, "You can be right or you can make money." Although it's not explicitly stated, the logical outcome of that quote is being right and making money are mutually exclusive, and it's within this binary ultimatum and dichotomy you must choose. The reason that it means that is because of the word or. The word or serves as a coordinating conjunction connecting two contrasting options or alternatives. It indicates that the quote presents a choice between two possibilities, suggesting that you must consider one option or the other. More specifically, it's a logical disjunction, indicating that the two options are mutually exclusive. I, for one, find that to be rubbish. The idea that you have to choose between being right and making money, that is. To be or not to be? Did you think I was kidding about the word or? Just wait until you hear about the word be and right. You can be right or you can make money. For sake of argument, if someone is telling you that you can be right or you can make money, then that means for all intents and purposes that you're currently wrong and that they're trying to be nice about it. The facts have probably changed since your initial thesis. You haven't updated your model, and if you were to update your model, then you'd recognize that you're now wrong. But since you don't update your model, for whatever the reason may be, you can stay deluded in thinking that you're right. In the best case scenario, you were right but no longer are, which is to say that you're currently wrong. So how could you be right then? The best I can tell is that they're using the words stubborn, dogmatic, and wrong interchangeably with the word right. Right because they're speaking to the person in a way that the person is thinking about the situation and themselves. Remember, that person doesn't think they're wrong, because as far as that person is concerned, they're right and not dogmatic. Therefore, the advice giver tries their best to not afflict the other person's ego and perception of reality and thus compromises by softening their speech. It's tactical coercive subterfuge. It also helps the person save face in not having to acknowledge explicitly that they're wrong. Seemingly, it's too offensive and unproductive to overtly call out someone's dogmatism, so instead people use euphemisms such as right. On to the word be. Be is a present tense verb, not a past tense verb. Is the advice giver suffering from dementia? That would explain this sort of temporal disorientation. So not only is the speaker conflating the current condition of the person, right versus wrong, but also the time at which that condition is being experienced, present or the past. They are trying to warp the fabric of reality to cater to someone's ego. That's an ostentatious act as far as I'm concerned, and is anything but helpful. When you stretch the truth, there's often going to be inconsistencies in your speech due to the fact of trying to describe real circumstances with inaccurate words. Once you misinterpret their current condition, you also alter time. A more literally accurate way of saying this sort of advice is, you can be wrong, or, and we've already discussed that word, or you can make money. But there's another interesting thing going on here, which is how people use the word right and dogmatic interchangeably. There is a great human truth being revealed here, a truth that I'm sure you've frustratingly encountered numerous times. And the truth is that most people can't differentiate between their beliefs and reality, and thus they become dogmatic. Yes, you heard that right. They rather be right in theory but wrong in practice. The implication of that is that many people's beliefs aren't predicated on reality. Remember, even though new available information has come along, the person is refusing to incorporate it into their belief structure due to how it would change their belief structure and thus reflect upon their intelligence, as the quote was trying to discourage a person from doing in the first place. I'm sure you've heard such expressions as, keep your opinions to yourself, or keep politics out of investing. What these people are doing is unknowingly making a tacit admission. They're recognizing that people's opinions, and more specifically, opinions related to politics, aren't predicated on the available body of facts, and instead are an amalgamation of ideology, emotions, and selective information gathering. If that wasn't the case, then what they're essentially saying would be, keep facts out of the conversation. But they don't say that, do they? No, they say keep politics out of investing, or keep your opinion to yourself. But if your opinions, in general, were predicated on facts and a comprehensive modeling of the facts, then that means that other person is telling you to keep facts out of the conversation. Saying that's your opinion is essentially saying your opinion isn't based upon the facts, or is at best inclusive in its incorporating and accounting of the relevant set of facts. Because yet again, if it didn't mean that, then they're essentially saying that's your facts. But they also don't say that. They say that's your opinion. This is just another version of the be right dynamic, except it's more the your opinion dynamic. Meaning that people say you can be right or you can make money. What they're really saying is you can be wrong or you can make money. And then that's your opinion dynamic. What they're really saying is you're making factless, baseless claims, but that would be too harsh. So instead they say something like, that's your opinion. It's as though one's opinion can't correlate with facts. It's as though they're mutually exclusive. That's what people are hinting at when they say such a dismissive thing. And the reason they do that is because it's part of their heuristics. And the reason it's part of their heuristics is because that's what they're accustomed to dealing with. This means that the average person does indeed, at best, only loosely base their opinions on facts. It's a beautiful accidental confession of the human condition to say, that's your opinion, or keep politics out of it. To bring this full circle, this is why the words defending, logic, and right really mean cop-out, bullshit, and wrong. Most people don't really use logic or concern themselves with having their beliefs translate to being factually right. Therefore, for all intents and purposes, the primary definition of these words is in the connotation. And that's unfortunate because it means people are dismissing the very concepts that would aid them in a more fulfilling and productive life. But humans are going to human. This is all the BS that you have to deconstruct to get to the issue of today's quoted pieces. In all fairness, most people do this instantaneously and subconsciously. But to actually sit down and write out all of this shows the complexity of it all and its ridiculous appearance. It's funny, for all the people who accuse me of being verbose and circuitous, people are more than willing to go to these lengths of mental gymnastics, layers, and implications to avoid saying the word dogmatic, stubborn, or illogical. Bad bets and being wrong. Saying that a bad bet isn't an indictment on your intelligence is a much different statement than saying that a bad bet isn't necessarily an indictment on your intelligence. The reason it's much different is because actionable reality is a torque multiplier to words. The inclusion or exclusion of a single word can quite literally make all the difference. The difference in reality is stark. According to this individual, me going to the casino and betting my entire life savings on a roulette game isn't an indictment on my intelligence. The reason being is that it's a singular bad bet and therefore isn't of the chronic state. Now you might think this would trigger their second caveat of a spectacularly bad outcome because they were stubborn. End quote. But not necessarily. Stubborn is doing something in spite of good arguments or reasons. But what happens if they're of low intellect and fail to think things through, i.e., the capacity to abstractly conceptualize the spectrum of potential counterfactual futures? Essentially, if it lands on black, what will happen to my life and how will I pay rent and this and that and how long will it take me to save my money and what happens if it lands on red? You're conceptualizing counterfactual futures of what you would do. The logical conclusion here is that they weren't stubborn, but of low intelligence. Now, in all fairness, I'm taking this out of context to a fair degree, but it's to demonstrate that a low intelligent person can be observed and have it determined before chronic failure or a spectacularly bad outcome emerges that their poor behavior is the consequence of their poor decision making. So yes, a bad bet can most certainly be the consequence of someone's intelligence. And it needn't be a spectacular blow-up or chronic. A kid who doesn't tie their shoelaces doesn't seem to know any better and hasn't suffered any adverse side effects. But does that mean that we should wait for a series of falls or injuries to occur before intervening? Well, it's no different with yourself. You're most likely engaged in many not tying your shoelaces scenarios, and that is a direct reflection of your intellect. What's your assessment of a fund manager who's underperforming their benchmark? So they decide to buy a basket of whatever the current high-flying stocks are and hope that they'll make up for their underperformance before the quarter ends because they're afraid of being redeemed if he doesn't outperform. Is that smart, intelligent game theory, or is that short-sighted performance chasing? After all, if he loses money on the high flyers, so what? The LPs were going to redeem him anyway. But if he makes money, then that buys him another quarter. What's your assessment of his intelligence in both a win and lose situation? This becomes a level of analysis problem. Does being wrong refer to poor decision-making processes or just the outcomes? Aren't they directly linked with one another? One needn't wait for a chronic state of being wrong nor having a spectacularly bad outcome before addressing underlying problems. I thought an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. What happened to early intervention? What happened to the iceberg model? Why wait for catastrophe to strike when you could have prevented it? Why wait for unsafe acts to develop into a chronic state? But by Telling someone that being wrong isn't an indictment of their intelligence only aids them in not examining the potential errors that they're committing and waiting for something more spectacularly wrong to occur before doing so. Defending your logic. Here they are again using words in replacement of other words to express a sentiment. And just as a greater truth was revealed with such phrases as "that's your opinion" and "keep politics out of it," or how we discovered that right means wrong, another such truth emerges here too. Defending doesn't mean taking a constructive and critical thinking stance and exploring the merits and validity of an idea. Defending your logic doesn't mean collaborative dialogue and an attempt to explore complex ideas to arrive at more nuanced and well-supported conclusions in an attempt to foster a more comprehensive understanding of the world, and to do so via challenging assumptions, asking probing questions, and monitoring inconsistencies and identifying fallacies. Nope. Instead, the word idea... What? Nope. Instead, the word idea and definition of the word defend has become... Oh yes, defending your ideas. Nope, instead the word idea and definition of the word defend has become terribly bastardized and appropriated to mean acting with emotional reactance in the form of cope and fallacy, in a foolish and stubborn fashion. And logic comes to mean cockamamie, filtered, partial and biased data which ignores disconfirming information. Yet again, the reason for this is because most people don't actually engage in merit-based arguments to any reasonable extent and instead prioritize sloppy post hoc rationalization with a heavy emphasis on emotionality, cope, and fallacy. Once we come to recognize this, it becomes obvious how people can so easily become dogmatic. Insofar as you don't need reality on your side, then you can believe whatever you want. Anything to avoid an ego-invested narrative violation. Actual logic is a foreign idea to most people, and the capacity to defend one's logic is a talent the vast majority of people do not possess. Here's a simple enough example. Quote, how can you look at the numbers? Look at how sticky the product is, how loyal the clients are, and think this is a terrible company with a terrible product. End quote. That's a comment made to an author in regard to an article he wrote which suggested selling a company due to its perceived high valuation, technical analysis, and potential execution risk of expanding the company internationally. The article never said that it was a terrible company with a terrible product or anything of that sort. But this is the illogicalness of people. Essentially, anything perceived as not flattering is heresy. Let this be a simple but important example. Saying that a company is overvalued is a narrative violation. In a future article, we'll be discussing how money can be lost on the juxtaposition between price and value. The above ideologue will always think that there's no price too high to pay for a company, and that's because they're narrative focused and not arithmetically focused. Meaning they'll just ignore reality whenever it's flattering. This is the same as them saying that the company has infinite value. But these are the results you get from people who can't defend their logic. It leaves cope and fallacy to fill the void. So that's what they do. They made up an argument that was tangentially associated with the topic, subsume the old topic into the newly created argument, and then criticize the new argument in a straw man fashion. That's what that quote I just read you did. All of that happened behind the scenes of one sentence. All of that just happened in one sentence. I'm sure that the person who posted that comment actually thought that they were making a defendable and logical argument. I'm sure they thought what they said was smart. And that's the reason why defending your logic, that's the reason why, quote, defending your logic, end quote, has come to mean what it does instead of what its denotation means. Let's get back to the quote to see how it contradicts the order of significance and succession in an investing process. Having defending defendable logic means that it incorporates as much as reality as possible. Otherwise, it would be less defensible because it couldn't account for certain aspects. And what makes a decision right is one's ability to defend the merit of the idea logically and its accuracy in accounting for reality. And doesn't that process directly correlate to the outcome and how you can manage your capital as a consequence? This is why you can't interpret the section of the paragraph literally, because a logical defensible thesis is a prerequisite for managing outcomes and how you manage your capital. Isn't your capital allocation predicated on the logical defensibility of your idea, and from that is where you gain your conviction? Isn't that what position sizing being all about? Higher conviction ideas are derived from more logically defensible ideas. As such, you allocate your capital accordingly to the degree of your confidence. Now that we understand what people mean when they speak of defending your logic, or being right, we can start to see why the focus is on capital management and outcomes. This is people's natural state. People are outcome focused and heavily discount the importance of a quality decision-making process. A good but off-topic example to demonstrate this is how people exercise and diet. The person has an outcome in mind, gaining muscle or losing weight. Yet they don't concern themselves with how to do that intelligently. They don't understand deload weeks, periodization training, mesocycles, sustainable caloric surpluses or deficits, hazards of radically altering their diet. And this is why the vast majority of people quickly plateau in the gym and why people struggle to keep off any weight they might have lost. They compromise the decision-making process that would have had them chart out a course of action and instead focus on the outcome. It's self-defeating behavior. The facts. The quote mentions that you should be less concerned with being right and defending your logic because you don't have all the facts. Let's be humble here. Most people barely have any facts. At best, most people have a couple of data points that they've thrown together to justify their emotionally prompted decision. A TikTok video of information essentially covers their entire scope of understanding. Insofar as not having all the facts goes, it's more of a platitude than anything else because it lacks any practical insight. Sure, it's worth remembering that there's the domain of the known unknowns and unknowns unknowns, but that very fact gets factored into your decision-making process. Now, it's also oftentimes counterproductive to say that to people due to the human propensity to latch onto something and anything that excuses their accountability. It overlooks the lack of effort and intellectual lethargy that people make in acquiring the facts, which is more of a practical concern because that is something that they have control over. Saying, hey man, we don't have all the facts will be interpreted as a free pass. What I've described to you is just as prevalent and pathological in the investing community as it is in the day-to-day life. And part of the investing community are the tweets tweeted, blogs written, and books written, and the paragraphs quoted out of those books like we're doing today. And that's what brings us to today's article. Like I've said, cope and fallacy knows no bounds. If you deploy cope and fallacy in your day-to-day life, such as in diet or exercise, why wouldn't you do the same in the investing landscape? Of course, that question is answered in people's initial foray into investing, right? They say to themselves, I'm lazy, personally incredulous, and intellectually lethargic. Knowing I possess these traits, will I still be able to be successful at investing? End quote. But between their lethargy, incredulousness, cope and fallacy, they never actually ask that question. And that is what the Dunning-Kruger effect is all about. All that matters to them is that they feel as if they can do it. Feels over reals for the win. Another point I'll mention here is that a lot of people don't know how they're successful. The problem with this is that they'll start trying to explain their success and it won't actually translate to success for those listening. A simple example of this is when a parent teaches their kids to swing. The adult knows how to swing, but doesn't know how to communicate it. Kick your legs isn't sufficient in generating the necessary torque to actually swing. They fail to articulate the body mechanics involved in the necessary sequence of motor patterns required to swing. I've observed parents, trying to teach their kids to swing numerous times, and it's a complete failure each and every time. They lack the conscious awareness of what's involved in order to then articulate it to someone else. So instead, they stumble over their words, grabbing for straws as how to swing. And this is what leads them to land on the part of the swinging which is most obvious to them: kicking your legs. They would just be as foolish to say rock back instead of kick your legs. People are horribly reductionistic and oversimplify things every chance they get. And like I've said, bias knows no bounds. So of course it gets carried over to the playground too. The issue is a successful person might be able to account for some of their reasons, but leaves out many of the other reasons. It's like giving you half the piece to a puzzle and you thinking that you're going to have the same puzzle, the same outcome. All of this is to say that as much as people say they want a certain outcome, they're often not willing to do the work that will set them up to experience the outcome. It goes decision, then action, then outcome. It goes input, then output. It goes rightness demonstrated in defensible logic, then managing capital and outcome. How could this be any other way? Worrying more about eggs and less about chickens is a good way to have neither. Your decisions and their rightness are the chickens which set your future outcomes into motion. To worry about your eggs is to worry about your chickens. They're not exclusive. But you can't control the eggs directly, only indirectly. It might be worth emphasizing your circle of influence. It might be worth emphasizing your circle of influence and not your circle of concern. Don't believe me? Just ask this guy. He engaged in a compromised decision-making process that was right the majority of the time, but should have seen that the times it didn't work would blow up his portfolio. He didn't need to have a bad outcome or a series of losses to realize it was a bad decision-making process. What he was doing wasn't sustainable. That's the beauty of our ability to abstractly conceptualize ideas. It allows us to kill the ideas instead of killing your portfolio. In conclusion, at the end of the day, this is humans being humans. They often speak in a factually false but sentimentally true fashion. Something as simple as, "I don't normally do that," gets bastardized and becomes, "He says he doesn't do that." The number of times I've had this happen to me is unbelievable, and that's about as simple as it gets. So now layer on complex sentences, paragraphs, multiple paragraphs, internally logical contradictions, implications, and so on. What chance do you think people have? The cynical take is very little. So, is it any wonder that most fail at the investing game? It's cool. Words can mean whatever. It's no longer about the objective definitions of words, but the subjective interpreter or communicator of those words. And since that's the case, at least you might think that, so much for a woman ever winning at women's sports again. When right means wrong, as today's example demonstrated, you're screwed. That's about as axiomatic and canonical as it gets. And if you compromise that, you're a goner. I'm serious. If you think that it's okay to call something right when it is wrong, you're done. For you to reach such a point of pandering, you've sufficiently warped your speech to an irredeemable extent, in all probability. And since your speech is entwined in part and parcel of your thoughts, and your thoughts are part and parcel of your actions, you're done. The reason is simple. You will not act in accordance with reality, and thus the probability of you getting what you want out of reality is near zero. Your speech is the orientating mechanism that guides you through this world. If you warp that, you warp the map that guides you in that world. And what's the likelihood of getting where you want to be with a distorted map? Is it any wonder most people fail at the investing game? I had a whole piece about ESG and EV bros to demonstrate the above points throughout this article about being right and defending their logic, but this has gone on long enough, so maybe next time. As to alternative phrasings, let me suggest you can be arrogant or you can make money, or you can be hubristic or you can make money, or you can be caught up in what once was, or you can focus on what currently is. That's the difference between ideological versus praxeological. The following cartoon brilliantly demonstrates how people desire to be spoken to. So I'll end things here to let you think about it. My son, to win in combat, you must let go of your conscious self. Why, master? Because your motor memories are stored as implicit memory, not declarative memory. Trying to use your conscious brain for motor tasks is basically accessing the wrong database. Can you rephrase that as mystical wisdom? Dwell within your inner, inness. Thank you, wise master.